Don't come. My wife doesn't want you at our wedding. I stared at that text message for a full minute, reading it over and over. My wife? They weren't even married yet, and I was the one paying for everything. My son had just banned me from his own wedding, the wedding I'd spent $185,000 to make perfect. No phone call, no explanation, just exile delivered through 14 words on a screen. But here's what really twisted the knife. I thought Jonathan was just being an ungrateful brat. Turns out he was executing a murder plot. This story has more twists than a 40-story construction project, and every single betrayal nearly destroyed me. But sometimes the people who try to bury you don't realize you know exactly where they keep their secrets. If you've ever had someone close to you stab you in the back, you'll understand what happened next. Hit subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're listening from, because this gets so much worse before it gets better. I'm Larry Fitzgerald. Built my construction company from nothing in Portland over 30 years. When my wife Helen died, I thought my son would carry on our legacy. Instead, he decided to steal it. And the woman he called his fiancée? She wasn't just after our money. She wanted me in the ground. Jonathan came into this world when I was 30 years old, fresh off my biggest contract yet. Helen and we thought we had it all figured out. I'd build the business, she'd raise our boy, and together we'd create something lasting, something that meant more than just money in the bank. For 28 years, I watched that kid grow up thinking he understood what work meant. I brought him to job sites when he was 10, taught him how to read blueprints by 12, showed him how to manage a crew by 16. Every Friday night, we'd sit at the kitchen table going over the week's progress reports. Helen would make her famous pot roast, and we'd talk about the future of Fitzgerald Construction. "This will all be yours someday, son," I told him 100 times. "But you need to understand what it takes to build something that lasts." Jonathan seemed to get it. Graduated from Portland State with a business degree, came to work for me right after college. For 6 years, he learned every aspect of the operation. Estimating, project management, client relations, even got his hands dirty on the actual construction when we were short-handed. When Helen got sick, Jonathan stepped up, took care of arrangements, handled the logistics while I fell apart. After the funeral, he was the one who convinced me to get back to work. "Dad, Mom would want you to keep building," he said, standing in my office with those earnest brown eyes. "The company is your legacy," to her. So I kept building. We landed the Dover Street project last year, our biggest contract ever, $650,000 to renovate the historic Morrison building downtown. Jonathan handled most of the client interface while I focused on the technical aspects. Perfect father-son partnership, or so I thought. 3 months ago, Jonathan started bringing Cassie around more often. Cassandra Whitmore, he called her. Blonde, beautiful, and smart as a whip when it came to business talk. She knew more about construction contracts than most people who'd been in the industry for years. "She's special, Dad," Jonathan told me over coffee one morning. "I think she might be the one." I was happy for him. After losing Helen, I understood how precious it was to find someone who truly got you. Cassie seemed to understand our business, respected what we'd built, and made Jonathan smile in a way I hadn't seen since his mother died. The engagement happened fast. Too fast, maybe, but young love moves at its own pace. They wanted a spring wedding, something elegant but not too flashy. When Jonathan asked if I'd help with the costs, I didn't hesitate. But there were signs I should have caught earlier, small things that didn't add up until it was almost too late. The wedding planning started innocently enough. Jonathan and Cassie came to me with a budget breakdown. Venue, catering, flowers, the works. $185,000 total. Not cheap, but for my only son's wedding, I was willing to write the check. "Are you sure about this amount?" I asked, reviewing their spreadsheet. "That's a lot of money for one day." Cassie leaned forward, her green eyes bright with enthusiasm. "Mr. Fitzgerald, this is an investment in Jonathan's future. The guest list includes some very important people from Coleman Industries and other major players in Portland construction. The networking opportunities alone will pay for itself." Something about the way she said Coleman Industries made my skin crawl. Charles Coleman had been my biggest competitor for 20 years. We'd bid against each other on dozens of projects, and he'd never missed a chance to undercut me or spread rumors about Fitzgerald Construction's quality. Why would Coleman people be at Jonathan's wedding? I asked. Oh, Cassie has some business connections there, Jonathan said quickly. Nothing to worry about, Dad, just expanding our network. I should have pressed harder on that, but I was still grieving Helen and trying to be supportive. So I wrote the check and deposited it into their wedding account at Portland Federal Credit Union. The months that followed were a blur of wedding preparations and work demands. The Dover Street project was consuming most of my attention. We were behind schedule, over budget, and dealing with unexpected structural issues that required constant problem solving. Jonathan was supposedly handling the client communications, but I noticed Charles Morrison, the building owner, was getting increasingly frustrated with our progress updates. Larry, I'm not getting straight answers from your son, Morrison told me during a tense phone call in early October. He promised me completion by November 1st, but my architect says you're nowhere near finished. Let me look into that, I said, but when I tried to discuss it with Jonathan, he was always rushing off to some wedding-related appointment with Cassie. Then came the contract modifications. Jonathan presented me with amended paperwork for the Dover Street project, claiming Morrison wanted to add premium finishes that would increase our margin. The new contract was worth $650,000 instead of our original $420,000. Good news, except the signature line already had my name on it. When did I sign this? I asked, staring at the document. Last Tuesday, remember? You were reviewing the electrical subcontractor bids and said you'd handle the client paperwork. I didn't remember signing anything like that, but my memory had been foggy since Helen's passing. Grief does things to your mind, makes you question what you know for certain. The final red flag came 3 weeks before the wedding. I was working late in the office, going through our project files, when I noticed some of our proprietary blueprints were missing. These weren't just any blueprints. They were our detailed plans for a new, sustainable building technique I'd developed over 15 years. Our competitive advantage. Jonathan, do you know anything about the missing Morrison building plans? I asked him the next morning. Missing? He looked genuinely confused. I haven't seen them. Maybe they're in the archive files? We searched everywhere, never found them. But 2 days later, I heard through the grapevine that Coleman Industries had just won a major contract using innovative building techniques that sounded suspiciously familiar. That's when I started putting the pieces together, but by then it was too late to stop what was already in motion. Sunday, November 15th, 3:42 p.m. I was sitting in my home office going through the final wedding payment paperwork when my phone buzzed with that text message, the one that changed everything. Don't come. My wife doesn't want you at our wedding. I stared at those words for a full minute, reading them over and over, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. My wife? They weren't even married yet. And why would Cassie not want me there? I'd been nothing but supportive, paid for the entire event, welcomed her into our family. I called Jonathan immediately. The phone rang 4 times before he answered. Dad, I can't talk right now. We're in the middle of final preparations. Jonathan, what's this about Cassie not wanting me at the wedding? And since when is she your wife? Long pause. Then, Dad, she thinks you've been too controlling about the planning. She wants to start our marriage fresh, without any family drama. Family drama? Son, I paid for this wedding. I've been nothing but supportive. I know, Dad, and we appreciate it. But Cassie feels like you've been undermining her decisions. Maybe it's better if you skip this one and we can all talk after the honeymoon. The line went dead. My own son had just uninvited me from his wedding, and I was expected to smile and pay for the privilege. I sat there for another minute, staring at the check I'd written that morning for the final wedding payment. $18,000 for the catering balance. Then I picked up my phone and called Jonathan back. Dad, please don't make this harder than it already is, Jonathan said when he answered. Son, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I'm about to make a phone call to Portland Federal Credit Union to stop payment on every check I've written for this wedding. That's $185,000 that's about to disappear from your account. Silence on the other end. You can't do that, he finally said, and I could hear the panic creeping into his voice. The vendors need to be paid. The venue, the caterer, the florist, they're all expecting payment this week. Then you'd better find another way to pay them, because I'm not funding a wedding I'm not invited to attend. Dad, be reasonable. Cassie just needs some space to process everything. After we get back from our honeymoon, we can all sit down and work this out. No, Jonathan. Here's what's going to happen. I'm hanging up this phone and calling the bank. You have 30 minutes to decide if you want to fix this or explain to Cassie why her dream wedding just turned into a nightmare. I ended the call and immediately dialed Portland Federal, account number ending in 6231, the wedding fund I'd established 6 months earlier. This is Larry Fitzgerald. I need to place a stop payment order on all checks written from account 6231, effective immediately. The bank representative was helpful but cautious. Mr. Fitzgerald, this is a fairly large account with significant recent activity. Are you certain you want to freeze all pending transactions? Completely certain, and I want a full transaction history for the past 6 months sent to my email within the hour. Yes, sir. The stop payment orders will be processed immediately, and you'll have the account history by 4 p.m. 23 minutes later, my phone exploded with calls. First Jonathan, then a number I didn't recognize, then Jonathan again. I let them go to voicemail. The unknown number left a message first. Mr. Fitzgerald, this is Cassie. I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding. Could you please call me back so we can work this out like adults? Jonathan's message was less diplomatic. Dad, what the hell are you doing? You're destroying my wedding over some petty family dispute. This isn't like you. But the account history that arrived at 4:07 p.m. was the real eye-opener. Portland Federal Credit Union had provided 6 months of detailed transaction records, and what I saw made my blood run cold. The wedding fund hadn't just been used for wedding expenses. There were cash withdrawals, transfers to accounts I didn't recognize, and payments to vendors that had nothing to do with any wedding I'd heard about. $47,000 transferred to an account belonging to C. Whitmore Consulting. $28,000 in cash withdrawals over the past month. $15,000 paid to something called Coleman Strategic Services. I grabbed my phone and called the one person I knew could make sense of this mess. Eleanor Brennan, the estate planning attorney who'd helped me set up Helen's trust after her diagnosis. Ellie, it's Larry Fitzgerald. I need you to look at some financial documents. Tonight, if possible. Larry, what's wrong? You sound shaken. I think my son has been stealing from me, and I'm not sure how deep this goes. Eleanor Brennan had been practicing estate law in Portland for 32 years. She'd helped 3 generations of construction families protect their assets, and she had a reputation for spotting financial fraud from miles away. Bring everything to my office, she said. Bank records, contracts, anything related to money changing hands between you and Jonathan in the past year. I spent the next 2 hours gathering documents. The Dover Street contract, the wedding fund records, our business account statements, and every piece of paperwork Jonathan had asked me to sign in recent months. When I arrived at Brennan Law Associates on Oak Street, Eleanor was waiting with coffee and a serious expression. Larry, before we start, I need to ask you something. Have you ever had any concerns about Jonathan's handling of business matters? I told her about the missing blueprints, the Dover Street contract I didn't remember signing, and Cassie's unusual knowledge of our industry. Eleanor spread the documents across her conference table and spent 45 minutes reviewing everything in complete silence. When she finally looked up, her face was grim. Larry, we need to call the police. What did you find? I asked, though part of me already knew I wasn't going to like the answer. Eleanor pulled out a magnifying glass and pointed to the Dover Street contract signature. This isn't your signature, Larry. Look at the way the F in Fitzgerald is formed. You always loop your capital letters, but this signature has sharp angles throughout. She was right. 28 years of signing contracts, and I knew my own signature better than anyone. This was a forgery, and not even a particularly good one. But that's not the worst part, Eleanor continued, pulling up the bank records on her laptop. Look at these transfers to C. Whitmore Consulting. I ran a corporate search this afternoon. That company was incorporated 3 months ago, and its registered business address is a P.O. box in Beaverton. What kind of consulting does Cassie do? According to the filing documents, strategic business consulting for construction industry clients. But here's the interesting part. The company's federal tax ID was applied for the same week Jonathan announced his engagement. I felt like I was falling down a very deep well. So Cassie created a fake company to steal money from the wedding fund? That's the small-time theft, Larry. The Dover Street contract is where things get serious. I called Morrison this afternoon and asked about the contract modifications. He told me he never authorized any changes to the original agreement, and he certainly never agreed to pay $650,000 for work that was originally bid at $420. Then where did that extra money go? Eleanor turned her laptop screen toward me. Bank records show a payment of $230,000 from Morrison Development to Fitzgerald Construction last month. But look where that money ended up. She highlighted a series of transfers that made my stomach turn. The Morrison payment had been deposited into our business account, then immediately transferred to 3 different accounts. One belonging to C. Whitmore Consulting, one registered to something called JF Enterprises, and a third account I didn't recognize. Jonathan has been using forged contracts to inflate our billing, then skimming the excess payments through shell companies, Eleanor explained. This isn't just theft, Larry. This is organized fraud that could land him in federal prison. I stared at the documents, trying to process what I was seeing. My son, the boy I'd taught to swing a hammer and read blueprints, had been systematically robbing me for months. There's more, Eleanor said, pulling out another stack of papers. I ran a background check on Cassandra Whitmore this afternoon. Her real name is Cassandra Coleman, and she's Charles Coleman's niece. The room started spinning. Coleman? As in Coleman Industries? The same Charles Coleman who's been your biggest competitor for 20 years. Cassie isn't some random woman who fell in love with your son, Larry. She's a plant, inserted into your family to gather intelligence and facilitate this theft operation. I thought about all those dinner conversations where Cassie had asked seemingly innocent questions about our upcoming projects, our client relationships, our proprietary techniques. She'd been conducting espionage while sitting at my kitchen table. The missing blueprints, I said, the pieces finally clicking together. She stole them, almost certainly. And I'd bet money that Coleman Industries' sudden innovation in sustainable construction techniques came directly from your stolen intellectual property. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, her expression deadly serious. Larry, this goes way beyond family drama or wedding disputes. What we're looking at is a coordinated effort to destroy Fitzgerald Construction and steal everything you've built over 30 years. I felt the anger building in my chest, but it wasn't the hot, explosive rage I'd expected. This was cold, calculated fury, the kind that comes from being systematically betrayed by the people you love most. What are my options? I asked. Legally, you have several paths forward. Criminal fraud charges, civil suits for damages, corporate espionage claims. But the first thing we need to do is protect your remaining assets before they can steal anything else. How do we do that? Eleanor was already reaching for her phone. Emergency injunction to freeze all accounts associated with Jonathan and Cassie. I'll file the paperwork tonight and have it in front of a judge first thing tomorrow morning. Oregon Uniform Trust Code gives us broad authority to protect trust assets when there's evidence of fraud. As she made the calls, I sat in that conference room thinking about the 30 years I'd spent building something meaningful. Every early morning, every late night, every sacrifice Helen and I had made to create a legacy for our son. All of it systematically dismantled by the very people who were supposed to carry it forward. The injunction will be in place by 9 a.m. tomorrow, Eleanor said after completing her calls. All accounts associated with this fraud will be frozen pending investigation. Jonathan and Cassie won't be able to access any more of your money. I stood to leave, gathering the documents that had just destroyed my understanding of my own family. Larry, Eleanor said as I reached the door, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Is there any possibility that Jonathan is being manipulated here? That Cassie is the mastermind and your son is just a victim? I thought about the question as I walked to my truck. Jonathan wasn't stupid or naive. He'd grown up in this business, understood contracts, and money management better than most people his age. The sophisticated nature of this fraud operation required someone with intimate knowledge of how Fitzgerald Construction operated. My son wasn't a victim in this scheme. He was a willing participant, and that realization hurt worse than any physical pain I'd ever experienced. But Jonathan had no idea that the worst was yet to come. Tuesday morning, 9:15 a.m. Judge Patricia Reynolds signed the emergency injunction, freezing all accounts connected to Jonathan Fitzgerald and Cassandra Coleman. Eleanor called me from the courthouse with the news. "It's done, Larry. Every account we identified is now under judicial oversight. They can't touch any of the money." "What about the business accounts?" "Those are protected too." I convinced the judge that there was probable cause to believe Jonathan had been using his access to company funds for fraudulent purposes. Fitzgerald Construction's accounts are frozen except for essential operations, and you're the only authorized signatory until this investigation concludes. I was sitting in my office when Jonathan called 23 minutes later. I let it ring 4 times before answering. "Dad, what did you do? I can't access any of our accounts. The bank says there's some kind of legal hold on everything." "That's right, son. Turns out when you forge your father's signature and steal hundreds of thousands of dollars, the legal system takes notice." Long pause. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The Dover Street contract, Jonathan. The one with my forged signature authorizing payments I never approved. The shell companies you and Cassie set up to launder money from the wedding fund. Should I keep going?" Another pause, longer this time. When Jonathan spoke again, his voice had changed. The panic was gone, replaced by something colder. "Dad, I think you're having some kind of breakdown. Maybe the stress of losing Mom is finally catching up with you. You should probably see someone about these paranoid delusions." "Paranoid delusions? Son, I have bank records. I have contract analysis. I have corporate filings showing that your fiancé created a consulting company specifically to steal money from our family." "You need help, Dad. Serious help. And until you get it, I don't think we should have any contact." The line went dead. My own son had just tried to gaslight me into thinking I was losing my mind, and he'd done it with the casual cruelty of someone who'd been planning this conversation for months. But Jonathan had made one critical error in his calculations. He'd underestimated how far I was willing to go to protect what Helen and I had built together. I called Detective Vincent Murphy at Portland Police Bureau's fraud unit. Vince and I had worked together on several cases where construction companies had been victims of check fraud and contractor scams. He knew the industry and understood how these schemes typically operated. "Larry, Eleanor Brennan sent me some preliminary documents yesterday. What we're looking at here is potentially federal-level fraud. Have you considered involving the FBI?" "I want to handle this locally first," I said. "These people destroyed my family. I want to look them in the eye when justice comes down." Vince arrived at my office that afternoon with a forensic accountant and a digital evidence specialist. For the next 4 hours, we methodically documented every aspect of the fraud scheme. The forensic accountant, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Wong, identified patterns I'd missed entirely. "Mr. Fitzgerald, this wasn't opportunistic theft. Look at the timing of these transactions. Every major withdrawal from the wedding fund corresponds to a period when you were out of the office on job sites. They were monitoring your schedule to avoid detection." The digital specialist found even more damning evidence. "Jonathan's company computer shows extensive file access to your proprietary blueprints, with timestamps indicating he downloaded everything to external storage devices. We also found encrypted communications with several email addresses registered to Coleman Industries." "Can you decrypt those communications?" I asked. "We'll need a warrant for that, but given the evidence of corporate espionage, I don't think that'll be a problem." Detective Murphy was taking notes throughout the entire process. "Larry, I need to ask you some difficult questions about Jonathan's recent behavior. Have you noticed any changes in his spending habits, lifestyle, or associations in the past year?" I thought about it carefully. Cassie started showing up about 6 months ago. Jonathan began taking longer lunch breaks, staying out later on weekends. He bought a new BMW in August. Paid cash, he said. At the time, I thought business was good and he was treating himself. "A new BMW? What model?" 7 Series. He said he got a good deal from a client who worked at a dealership. Patricia Wong looked up from her calculator. Based on the money we can trace through these shell companies, they've stolen approximately $430,000 over the past 8 months. That's enough for a BMW and a lot more. The investigation continued through the evening. By the time we finished, we had enough evidence to file criminal charges on multiple counts: fraud, forgery, theft, corporate espionage, and conspiracy. "What's the timeline for arrests?" I asked Detective Murphy. "We'll want to coordinate with the DA's office and make sure we have everything documented properly. Probably 48 to 72 hours. I drove home that night thinking about confrontation and consequences. Jonathan and Cassie had spent months planning their theft operation, but they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd assumed I was too trusting and too grief-stricken to fight back effectively. They were about to learn that you don't survive 30 years in the construction business without developing some very sharp survival instincts. Thursday morning, I got a call from Eleanor with an update that changed everything. "Larry, you need to get down to my office immediately. Patricia Wong found something in the financial records that we all missed. This fraud goes much deeper than we thought." I was in her office within 20 minutes. "What did you find?" Eleanor spread a new set of documents across the table. "Remember how we thought Jonathan and Cassie had stolen $430,000? We were wrong. They've been at this for over a year, and the total amount is closer to $750,000. I felt like I'd been hit in the chest with a wrecking ball. How is that possible? Systematic invoice fraud. Jonathan has been billing clients for work we never performed, collecting payments, and funneling the money through an increasingly sophisticated network of shell companies. Coleman Industries hasn't just been receiving stolen blueprints, they've been paying for them through fake consulting contracts." The room was spinning. My son had been stealing from me since before his mother died. While Helen was fighting cancer and I was focused on her care, Jonathan was systematically dismantling everything we'd built together, but I wasn't going to let him get away with it. "Eleanor, I want to confront them. Both of them. Before the arrests happen." "Larry, that's not a good idea. Let the police handle this." "No, I want to look my son in the eye and give him one chance to explain himself. After 30 years of being his father, I think I've earned that right." What I didn't tell Eleanor was that I had something else in mind, something that would ensure Jonathan and Cassie never saw the real trap coming until it was too late. Friday afternoon, I called Jonathan and asked him to meet me at the office. Neutral ground where we could talk without Cassie's influence, or so I told him. "Dad, I don't think that's a good idea. You've been acting erratic lately, and I'm concerned about your mental state. Son, I'm going to give you one opportunity to explain the discrepancies in our accounts before I turn everything over to the district attorney's office. You can bring Cassie if you want, but this conversation is happening today." 3 hours later, Jonathan walked into my office with Cassie at his side. Detective Murphy was positioned in the conference room next door with recording equipment, though Jonathan didn't know that. "Dad, I want you to know that we're both concerned about you," Jonathan began, settling into the chair across from my desk. "This whole paranoid episode about theft and fraud, it's not like you." Cassie leaned forward, her green eyes filled with practiced sympathy. "Mr. Fitzgerald, I know you're still grieving Helen's loss. Sometimes grief can manifest as paranoid thinking, and we want to help you get the support you need." I looked at both of them for a long moment, marveling at how convincing they were. If I hadn't seen the bank records and forensic evidence, I might have actually believed their concerned act. "Let me ask you both a direct question," I said, pulling out a manila folder. "Do either of you know anything about C. Whitmore Consulting?" Cassie's face didn't change, but I caught a micro-expression, just a tiny tightening around her eyes. "I've never heard of that company." "That's interesting because according to the Oregon Secretary of State's office, you're the registered owner and sole employee of C. Whitmore Consulting, the same company that received $47,000 from our wedding fund over the past 6 months. Jonathan shifted uncomfortably. "Dad, I think you're misunderstanding something about the wedding expenses." "Am I misunderstanding the Dover Street contract with the forged signature? The one where Morrison Development was billed an extra $230,000 for work that was never approved?" Cassie's composure cracked slightly. "Mr. Fitzgerald, you're obviously confused about the details of your own business operations. That's actually a common symptom of early-stage dementia." "Dementia?" I almost smiled. Cassie, that's a very interesting diagnosis from someone who supposedly works in business consulting. Although I suppose your real expertise is in industrial espionage. Her face went completely white. You see, I had a very enlightening conversation with Detective Murphy yesterday about your background. Your real background. It turns out Cassandra Coleman has been quite busy over the past year. Jonathan stood up abruptly. Dad, what are you implying? I'm not implying anything, son. I'm stating facts. Your fiancée is Charles Coleman's niece. She's been stealing our proprietary blueprints and selling them to Coleman Industries, and the two of you have embezzled over $700,000 from Fitzgerald Construction. Cassie recovered her composure with impressive speed. You bitter old man, you don't know what you're talking about. Jonathan and I are building a future together, and you're just angry because you're being left behind. Left behind? I opened the manila folder and spread the contents across my desk. Bank statements, forged contracts, corporate filings, digital forensics reports. Cassie, I know exactly who you are and what you've been doing. The question is whether you're going to keep lying to my face or start telling the truth. Jonathan looked at the documents, and for the first time since walking into the office, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. Dad, where did you get all this? From Detective Murphy, the forensic accountant, and Eleanor Brennan, the same people who will be testifying when you're on trial for fraud, forgery, and corporate espionage. Cassie stood up, her mask finally slipping completely. You arrogant bastard. Do you have any idea what you've stumbled into? This is so much bigger than your little construction company. Really? Tell me more about that. She was too angry to think clearly now. Coleman Industries has been planning to acquire Fitzgerald Construction for 2 years. My Uncle Charles identified your company as the biggest obstacle to dominating Portland's commercial construction market. When Jonathan and I got together, it was supposed to be a simple acquisition strategy. Jonathan looked stunned. Cassie, what are you saying? I'm saying your father is smarter than we gave him credit for, and our timeline just got accelerated. She turned back to me, her green eyes blazing with fury. But you know what, old man? You can't prove any of this was my idea. It's all going to come down on Jonathan. That's when I realized how deep this betrayal actually went. Cassie wasn't just stealing money. She was setting up my son to take the fall for everything. Jonathan, I said quietly, do you understand what she's telling you? My son looked back and forth between us, the reality of his situation finally sinking in. Cassie, you said this was just about getting startup money for our own company. Jonathan, you're an idiot. This was always about destroying your father's business and eliminating the competition. The fact that you were stupid enough to help us do it just made everything easier. I watched my son's world collapse in real time. Whatever feelings he'd had for Cassie, whatever future he'd imagined with her, it was all crashing down around him. But instead of anger or remorse, what I saw in Jonathan's face was something much worse. Cold calculation. Cassie, he said slowly, I think you should shut up right now. She laughed bitterly. Why? Because you're finally realizing that you've been played? Jonathan, you've been helping us commit felonies for over a year. Your fingerprints are on every forged document, every fraudulent transaction. When this goes to court, guess who's going to prison? Jonathan turned to me with an expression I'd never seen before. Dad, I need you to know that everything Cassie just said is true, but she left out the most important part. I waited. The part where we decided you were becoming too much of a problem to manage. The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees, and I realized I wasn't just dealing with theft and fraud anymore. I was dealing with something much more dangerous, and Detective Murphy needed to hear every word. What exactly does that mean, Jonathan? I kept my voice level, though every instinct was screaming at me to get out of that office immediately. Jonathan exchanged a look with Cassie, and something passed between them that made my skin crawl. Dad, you've been asking too many questions lately, poking around in business that doesn't concern you anymore. Business that doesn't concern me? Son, it's my company. Cassie sat back down. Her demeanor completely changed now that the truth was out. Not for much longer, it's not. See, Larry, the original plan was to let you fade into retirement gracefully while Jonathan took over operations. But you just couldn't let go of control. I thought about the past few months. about all the times I'd felt like I was losing my grip on the company I'd built, the missed meetings, the contracts I supposedly signed but couldn't remember, the blueprints that mysteriously disappeared. How long has this been going on? I asked. Since Mom died, Jonathan said matter-of-factly. You were so wrapped up in grief that you stopped paying attention to the details. Made it easy for us to start making changes. Us? Coleman Industries offered me a partnership, Jonathan explained. Run Fitzgerald Construction into the ground through systematic financial bleeding. Then Coleman acquires the assets at bankruptcy prices. I get a vice president position and a substantial signing bonus. I felt like I was talking to a stranger wearing my son's face. And Helen's death was just convenient timing for your betrayal? Helen's death was the catalyst, Cassie corrected. Before that, you were too sharp, too involved in daily operations. But grief made you sloppy. Made you trust Jonathan to handle things you should have been watching yourself. The pieces were falling into place with horrible clarity. The forged signatures. You've been practicing my handwriting since the funeral. Jonathan nodded. Turns out I have a talent for it. Been useful for authorizing contracts you never would have approved. And the wedding was what? A convenient cover story for stealing money? The wedding was a distraction, Cassie said. Keep you focused on happy family events while we dismantled your business piece by piece. Though I have to admit, you cutting off the wedding funding was not part of our timeline. I realized that Detective Murphy was hearing every word of this through the monitoring equipment next door. But there was something in their tone, something about the way they were being so casually honest about their crimes, that told me this conversation was heading somewhere very dangerous. So what's the end game here? I asked. You've stolen $700,000, destroyed my business relationships, and handed my proprietary designs to my biggest competitor. What's left? Jonathan and Cassie exchanged another look, and that's when I knew I was in real trouble. The problem, Dad, is that you're not cooperating with the timeline. You were supposed to gradually step back from operations, maybe develop some health issues that would justify early retirement. Instead, you're fighting back and asking questions that could expose the whole operation. So you need me out of the picture entirely. We need you gone, Cassie said bluntly. Permanently. The word hung in the air between us like a death sentence. My own son was talking about killing me, and he was doing it with the same tone he might use to discuss weekend plans. How long have you been planning this? I asked. The murder part? About 6 weeks, Jonathan said. We tried to make it look accidental at first. Remember your brake problems last month? I felt my blood turn to ice. 3 weeks ago, I'd nearly gone off the road when my brakes failed on the way to a job site. The mechanic said it looked like a brake line had worn through, just one of those things that happens with older vehicles. That was you. Cassie's idea, actually. She said car accidents were cleaner than other methods, less likely to trigger investigations. But apparently my sabotage skills need work, because you managed to get the truck stopped before anything happened. Tony Ricci at Morrison Auto found cut brake lines, didn't he? I was putting pieces together as I spoke. That's why he called me yesterday, wanting to discuss unusual wear patterns. Cassie looked annoyed. We told you your mechanic was too thorough, should have taken it somewhere else. But since the accident method didn't work, we're moving to Plan B, Jonathan continued, which is why we wanted to have this conversation in person. I glanced toward the door, calculating distances and escape routes. Jonathan was 28 years old and in good shape. Cassie was younger and faster than me. If this turned physical, I was at a serious disadvantage. What's Plan B? You're going to have a heart attack, Cassie explained, right here in your office, brought on by the stress of discovering that your son has been stealing from you. Very tragic, very believable, especially given your recent erratic behavior. Jonathan reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small syringe. Potassium chloride causes cardiac arrest that's virtually undetectable in autopsy unless they're specifically looking for it. I stared at the syringe in my son's hand, trying to process the fact that the boy I'd raised, the child I'd taught to ride a bike and throw a baseball, was about to murder me in cold blood. Jonathan, this is insane. Even if you kill me, the police investigation will expose everything you've been doing. Actually, no, Cassie said. See, once you're dead, Jonathan inherits Fitzgerald Construction as your sole heir. We'll have time to clean up the financial records, eliminate any evidence of wrongdoing, and present a clean balance sheet to Coleman Industries for acquisition. The insurance money alone is worth $2.5 million, Jonathan added, plus the company valuation, plus the real estate holdings. Cassie and I will be very well set up for the future. I realized this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision driven by desperation. This was a carefully planned murder designed to cover up everything they'd been doing and provide them with a massive financial payoff. But they'd made one critical error in their planning. "There's just one problem with your murder plot," I said, standing up slowly from my desk. "What's that?" Cassie asked. "You're both confessing to conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, and Detective Murphy has been recording every word through a wire I've been wearing since you walked into this office." Jonathan's face went white. "You're bluffing." I pulled back my jacket lapel to show the small recording device clipped to my shirt. Oregon State Law, 165.54, single-party consent recording. Everything you've said in the past 20 minutes is admissible evidence. Cassie lunged for the door, but it opened before she could reach it. Detective Murphy stepped into the room with two uniformed officers behind him. "Jonathan Fitzgerald and Cassandra Coleman, you're both under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, theft, and corporate espionage." As the officers handcuffed my son, I saw something in his eyes that I'd never seen before, genuine surprise that his plan had failed. But what I didn't realize was that Cassie had one more card to play, and the game was far from over. 3 days later, I was sitting in Eleanor Brennan's office reviewing the charges that had been filed against Jonathan and Cassie when Detective Murphy called with news that changed everything. "Larry, we've got a problem. Cassie's attorney is claiming she was coerced into everything by Jonathan, and she's offering to testify against him in exchange for immunity." "Immunity? She was the mastermind behind the whole operation." "I know that, and you know that. But her story is that Jonathan seduced her, manipulated her into the fraud scheme, and threatened her when she tried to back out. She's got text messages that seem to support her version of events." I felt the walls closing in. After everything we'd been through, everything we'd uncovered, Cassie might still find a way to escape justice. What about the recorded confession? Her attorney is claiming the confession was made under duress, that she only admitted to murder conspiracy because she was afraid Jonathan would kill her if she didn't go along with his story. Eleanor looked up from the legal documents she'd been reviewing. "Larry, we need to be prepared for the possibility that Cassie might beat most of these charges. Her attorney is very good, and juries tend to be sympathetic to women who claim they were manipulated by controlling men. So she gets away with stealing $750,000 and helping plan my murder?" "Not necessarily," Detective Murphy said. "But we need more evidence to make the charges stick, something that definitively proves Cassie was the architect of this scheme, not just a victim." That's when I remembered something Cassie had said during our confrontation. Something about Charles Coleman planning to acquire Fitzgerald Construction for 2 years. If that was true, there would be a paper trail. "Detective, how thoroughly have you investigated Coleman Industries' role in this?" "We've requested their business records related to any communications with Jonathan or Cassie, but Coleman's attorneys are fighting the subpoenas." Eleanor leaned forward. "What if we could get Cassie to incriminate herself without her attorney present? Something that couldn't be explained away as coercion?" "How would we do that?" "Larry, would you be willing to make a phone call to Cassie? Something that might convince her to reveal more about Coleman Industries' involvement." I thought about it carefully. Cassie was smart and manipulative, but she was also arrogant. If I played to her ego, made her think she was smarter than everyone else in the room, she might make a mistake. What would I say? Tell her you're willing to make a deal, that you'll drop the charges against her if she helps you recover the stolen money. Appeal to her greed and her sense of superiority. Detective Murphy set up the recording equipment while Eleanor coached me on exactly what to say. The call would be legally admissible as long as I was the one initiating contact, and Cassie freely chose to continue the conversation. I dialed Cassie's number from my office phone while Murphy monitored the recording equipment. "Larry?" Cassie sounded surprised to hear from me. "I thought your attorney told you not to have any contact with us." "Cassie, I want to make a deal. This whole situation has gotten out of hand, and I think we can work something out that benefits everyone." Long pause. "What kind of deal?" I'll drop all charges against you in exchange for help recovering the money. You keep whatever you've already taken, but I need the business accounts unfrozen so I can keep Fitzgerald Construction operating. What about Jonathan? Jonathan can face the consequences of his actions. But I think you were manipulated into this situation, and I'm willing to work with you to resolve it. Another pause, longer this time. When Cassie spoke again, her voice had a different quality, confident, almost gloating. Larry, you have no idea how deep this goes, do you? Jonathan wasn't the mastermind. Hell, Jonathan was barely a useful idiot. This whole operation was my uncle's idea from the very beginning. Your Uncle Charles? Charles Coleman has been planning to destroy Fitzgerald Construction since 2019. You cost him the Morrison building contract that year, and he decided you needed to be eliminated as competition. So the relationship with Jonathan was fake from the start? I've been dating Jonathan for 18 months, Larry. 18 months of pretending to care about that weak, pathetic mama's boy while systematically gathering intelligence about your business operations. She was confessing to everything, and she didn't even realize it. The murder plot was your idea too, wasn't it? Cassie laughed, and the sound made my skin crawl. Jonathan doesn't have the stomach for real violence. The brake line sabotage, the potassium chloride injection, that was all my planning. Your son is too soft to do what needs to be done. So you're the one who wants me dead. Larry, you're a relic. Your generation built things with muscle and determination, but the modern construction industry is about efficiency and consolidation. Coleman Industries represents the future, and Fitzgerald Construction is just an obstacle to progress. And when I'm dead? When you're dead, Coleman Industries will acquire Fitzgerald Construction's assets for pennies on the dollar, eliminate the competition, and Jonathan will have a tragic story about losing his father to a stress-induced heart attack. I looked at Detective Murphy, who was nodding vigorously. We had everything we needed. Cassie, there's just one more thing I need to tell you. What's that? You just confessed to conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, and this entire conversation has been recorded. The line went dead, but it didn't matter. We had her. Within 2 hours of that phone call, Detective Murphy had obtained new arrest warrants for Cassie on additional charges of conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree, corporate espionage, and racketeering. The recorded confession eliminated any possibility of claiming she was coerced or manipulated. But the real breakthrough came when Eleanor's investigation into Coleman Industries uncovered something that changed the entire scope of the case. Larry, you need to see this, Eleanor said, spreading a new set of documents across her conference table. I've been digging into Charles Coleman's business records, and what I found goes way beyond corporate competition. The documents showed a pattern of acquisitions going back 5 years. Small construction companies throughout Oregon and Washington that had mysteriously faced financial difficulties, then been acquired by Coleman Industries at below-market prices. Look at the timeline, Eleanor pointed out. Morrison Construction in Salem 2019 went bankrupt after a series of cost overruns and contract disputes, acquired by Coleman Industries 6 months later. Pacific Northwest Builders in Eugene 2020. Financial irregularities led to criminal charges against the owner. Company assets purchased by Coleman at auction. Cascade Construction in Bend, 2020. Owner died in a car accident. Business sold to Coleman by the estate. I studied the documents, seeing a pattern that made my blood run cold. Eleanor, are you saying Charles Coleman has been systematically destroying his competition for years? I'm saying the evidence suggests a pattern of corporate assassination that makes what happened to you look like amateur hour. Detective Murphy leaned over the table. How many companies total? 12 over the past 5 years. Combined value of approximately $47 million in assets acquired for roughly $12 million. Charles Coleman has been building a construction empire by eliminating anyone who posed a threat to his market dominance. And Cassie was his primary weapon. Eleanor nodded grimly. Cassandra Coleman has been connected to at least 6 of these acquisitions, sometimes as a romantic relationship, sometimes as a business consultant, always present during the critical period when these companies collapsed. The scope of what we were dealing with was staggering. This wasn't just about Fitzgerald Construction or even about my personal betrayal by Jonathan. We'd uncovered what amounted to an organized crime operation disguised as legitimate business competition. "What's our next move?" I asked. Detective Murphy was already reaching for his phone. "Federal involvement. This crosses state lines and involves racketeering, which means FBI jurisdiction. We're looking at RICO prosecution for the entire Coleman organization." "What about Jonathan?" "Jonathan is looking at 25 years minimum on the charges we already have. Murder conspiracy, fraud, corporate espionage. He's going away for a very long time." I felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Justice was coming, but at the cost of my relationship with my son. The boy I'd raised was going to spend the prime of his life in federal prison. "But there's something else you need to know," Eleanor said, her expression troubled. "Something I discovered while reviewing your estate planning documents." "What now?" "Larry, do you remember the family trust we established after Helen was diagnosed with cancer?" "Of course. The one that ensures Jonathan inherits everything if something happens to me." Eleanor shook her head. "That's not exactly what the trust says. I need you to look at Section 12, subsection C." She handed me a copy of the trust document, pointing to a specific paragraph I'd forgotten about. As I read the legal language, I felt my understanding of the situation shift dramatically. "The betrayal clause," I said slowly. "You insisted on including it," Eleanor reminded me. "You said you wanted protection against the possibility that Jonathan might someday choose money over family loyalty." The trust document was clear. If Jonathan Fitzgerald was ever convicted of fraud, theft, or any crime involving betrayal of family trust, his inheritance would be forfeit. All assets would transfer to a charitable remainder trust benefiting St. Mary's Hospital, where Helen had received her cancer treatment. "Eleanor, are you telling me that Jonathan's conviction will trigger this clause?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you. When Jonathan is sentenced, he'll lose any claim to Fitzgerald Construction and the family assets, everything. The company will be transferred to the hospital foundation, and you'll retain lifetime management control with a $50,000 annual salary." I stared at the document, remembering the day Helen and I had signed it. She'd been the one who suggested the betrayal clause, worried that grief might make me too trusting if something happened to her. "She knew," I said quietly. "Helen knew this might happen someday." "Your wife was a wise woman," Eleanor said. "She understood that love without accountability isn't really love at all." Detective Murphy looked confused. "So what does this mean for the criminal case?" "It means Jonathan didn't just betray his father," I said, understanding the full implications for the first time. "He betrayed his mother's memory and destroyed his own future in the process." "The irony is perfect," Eleanor added. "Jonathan thought he was stealing his inheritance. What he actually did was guarantee he'd never receive it." 3 weeks later, the FBI arrested Charles Coleman and 14 members of his organization on federal racketeering charges. The investigation had expanded to include construction fraud schemes in 4 states, with damages estimated at over $200 million. Cassie was indicted on 17 federal charges, including conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, and corporate espionage. Her recorded confession had made her the star witness in her own prosecution. Jonathan pled guilty to conspiracy and fraud charges in exchange for testimony against the Coleman organization. His sentencing hearing was scheduled for February, but the outcome was already clear: a minimum of 15 years in federal prison. But the story wasn't over yet, because there was still one final twist that none of us had seen coming. The day before Jonathan's sentencing hearing, he asked to meet with me one last time. Against Eleanor's advice, I agreed to see him at the Federal Detention Center. Jonathan looked older than his 28 years, the stress of the past 3 months visible in every line of his face. When he sat down across from me in the visiting room, I saw something I hadn't expected: genuine remorse. "Dad, I know you probably don't want to hear this, but I need to say I'm sorry. Sorry for stealing from me, or sorry for trying to kill me. Sorry for all of it. Sorry for betraying everything you and Mom built. Sorry for letting Cassie manipulate me into thinking money was more important than family." I studied his face, trying to determine if this was another manipulation or genuine repentance. Jonathan, do you understand what's going to happen tomorrow? 15 years minimum. I'll be 43 when I get out, and I'll have lost everything that ever mattered. And not just the prison time, son, the trust clause. Jonathan's face went blank. What trust clause? I pulled out a copy of the family trust document and slid it across the table. Section 12, subsection C, the betrayal clause your mother insisted we include. As Jonathan read the legal language, I watched his understanding dawn. This says that if I am convicted of betraying the family trust, I forfeit any claim to inheritance. That's right. When you're sentenced tomorrow, everything transfers to the Helen Fitzgerald Memorial Foundation at St. Mary's Hospital. Fitzgerald Construction, the real estate holdings, all of it goes to charity. Jonathan sat back in his chair, the full scope of his losses finally sinking in. So I destroyed my life for nothing. You destroyed your life for the illusion of easy money and the attention of a woman who was using you from day one. Dad, is there any way to fix this? Any way to make this right? I thought about his question carefully. For 30 years, I'd been Jonathan's father. I'd taught him right from wrong, showed him the value of honest work, tried to instill the values Helen and I believed in, but in the end, when tested, he'd chosen betrayal over loyalty. Jonathan, there are consequences for the choices we make. You chose to steal from your family, to sell out everything your mother and I built, and to participate in a plot to kill me. Those choices have consequences. But I was manipulated. Cassie lied to me about everything. Son, you're a 28-year-old college graduate who'd been working in the construction industry for 6 years. You knew the difference between right and wrong. You knew forging my signature was illegal. You knew stealing money was wrong. Cassie didn't make you do those things. She just made it easier for you to justify them. Jonathan looked down at the table, and I could see him struggling with the reality of his situation. So that's it? I go to prison, lose everything, and you wash your hands of me forever? I'll always be your father, Jonathan, but I'll never trust you again, and I'll never pretend that what you did was acceptable. What happens when I get out of prison? That depends on who you choose to be when you're released. If you serve your time, accept responsibility for your actions, and demonstrate genuine change, we can talk about what kind of relationship is possible, but you'll never work for Fitzgerald Construction again, and you'll never have access to family assets. And if I don't change, then you'll be a stranger who used to be my son. Jonathan nodded slowly, understanding that this conversation was really about setting boundaries for whatever relationship we might have in the future. Dad, there's something else I need to tell you. Something about the Helen Fitzgerald Memorial Foundation. What about it? When Mom was sick, she made me promise something. She said if anything ever happened that made me choose between doing what's right and doing what's easy, I should remember that she was watching. Jonathan looked up at me with tears in his eyes. I forgot that promise, Dad. I forgot everything that mattered. I stood to leave, understanding that this was both an ending and a beginning. Your mother is still watching, son. The question is what she's going to see from here on out. The next day, Jonathan was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison, and the Helen Fitzgerald Memorial Foundation officially took control of $8.2 million in assets, dedicated to providing construction training programs for disadvantaged youth in Portland. Sometimes justice takes unexpected forms, but it always comes around eventually. 6 months later, I was standing in the workshop of the Helen Fitzgerald Memorial Foundation, watching 16 young people learn how to read blueprints and operate power tools. The foundation had purchased a converted warehouse on the east side of Portland, and we were training a new generation of construction workers who understood that building something meaningful takes time, patience, and integrity. My official title was Program Director, with a $50,000 annual salary and complete autonomy to run the training programs however I saw fit. It wasn't the retirement I'd planned, but it was infinitely more satisfying than anything I could have imagined. Mr. Fitzgerald, called out Maria, a 17-year-old whose family had emigrated from Guatemala, can you check my measurements on this framing? I walked over to inspect her work, remembering all the times I'd done the same thing with Jonathan when he was learning the trade. The difference was that Maria was here because she wanted to build a better life, not because she felt entitled to inherit one. Perfect, I told her. Your corner joints are square and your spacing is exact. You've got natural talent for this work. The foundation was providing full scholarships to kids who couldn't afford trade school, teaching them marketable skills while instilling the values of honest work and personal responsibility. Every graduate would leave with industry certifications and guaranteed job placement with reputable construction companies throughout Oregon. Eleanor Brennan stopped by that afternoon to review the Foundation's quarterly financial reports. Larry, you should know that the FBI recovered most of the money Coleman Industries stole from other companies. The Victims' Compensation Fund will add another $3.7 million to the Foundation's endowment. Good. We can expand the program to include electrical and plumbing training. Any word from Jonathan? I shook my head. He writes occasionally, but I don't respond. When he's ready to have a real conversation about accountability and change, he knows how to reach me. Eleanor gathered her paperwork and headed for the door. You know, Helen would be proud of what you've built here. After she left, I walked through the workshop one more time, watching young people learn skills that would serve them for a lifetime. This was what legacy really meant, not just passing money from one generation to the next, but creating something that made the world a little bit better. My phone buzzed with a text message from Maria. Mr. Fitzgerald, I got accepted to the apprenticeship program at Morrison Construction. Thank you for believing in me. I smiled, remembering why I'd fallen in love with construction work in the first place. It wasn't about the money or the family business or even the buildings themselves. It was about building people who knew how to build things that last. And if you're ever driving through Portland and see young people wearing Helen Fitzgerald Memorial Foundation t-shirts working on construction sites, know that they're carrying forward something bigger than any one family's legacy. They're proving that trust, once broken, can be rebuilt, but only with better materials and stronger foundations.